In September of 1943, SS photographer Wilhelm Hoffmann documented what appeared to be a routine interrogation at the Ravensbrück concentration camp. The photograph depicts 8 Nazi officers surrounding a young woman, who sits defiantly on a wooden table in the prison yard. For 80 years, the image remained buried in classified Wehrmacht archives until digital restoration specialists discovered it in 2024. To clarify the woman's face, advanced image enhancement technology using artificial intelligence was applied. Facial recognition software identified her as Maria Volkova, a Soviet intelligence officer who, it was reported, had been killed in a partisan raid 6 months earlier. Further investigation revealed that Volkova had been captured while infiltrating the camp to document medical experiments being conducted on female prisoners. The photograph captured the moment before her execution, but what experts discovered next was even more shocking. The enhanced image revealed subtle hand signals being made by 2 officers, coded messages used by a secret Allied resistance network operating within the SS. The investigation showed that several Nazi officers in the photograph were, in fact, deeply undercover Allied agents who had been working for years to sabotage Nazi operations from the inside. The woman's capture compromised their entire network, leading to a desperate plan to stage her execution and smuggle out intelligence, which later proved crucial to the liberation of concentration camps throughout Eastern Europe. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos. Dr. Alexei Petrov, a military historian and Second World War specialist, never expected that his everyday work at the Russian State Military Archive would lead to one of the most astonishing discoveries of the 21st century. On a cold morning in January of 2024, Petrov was inventorying newly declassified Wehrmacht archives handed over to Russian authorities by the German government as part of ongoing reconciliation efforts. Among the thousands of documents and photographs filling cardboard boxes, one particular folder caught his eye. It was stamped with the words, Ravensbrück, September 1943, SS Internal Security. Photographer Wilhelm Hoffmann. Petrov opened the folder and discovered a series of photographs documenting what appeared to be routine operations at the infamous women's concentration camp. Most of the photographs depicted Nazi officers inspecting barracks, prisoners at work, and various administrative buildings. However, one photograph stood out. It showed 8 Nazi officers surrounding a young woman sitting on a wooden table in the camp courtyard. Petrov immediately noted several unusual details. First, the woman was not wearing the characteristic striped uniform of the camp's prisoners. Second, her posture was defiant and proud, which seemed unbelievable for a prisoner standing before Nazi officers. Third, the officers' expressions varied from open hostility to strange restraint. Petrov made digital copies of all the photographs, but this particular image kept bothering him. Something about the composition seemed wrong, out of place. Why would an SS photographer document this moment? Why did the woman look so fearless in the face of obvious danger? Petrov decided to examine the photograph more closely, using a high-resolution digital scanner and image enhancement software available in the archive. The initial scan didn't reveal anything unusual. The photograph was slightly blurry, as expected from a snapshot taken in 1943. The officers' faces were reasonably clear, but the woman's face was partially obscured, probably due to movement at the moment the picture was taken. Petrov decided to apply the latest image enhancement software, designed for restoring historical photographs. When the enhanced version appeared on his screen, he froze. The woman's face was now clearly visible, and something about her features seemed familiar to him. Petrov exported the enhanced image and uploaded it into a facial recognition database containing thousands of identified historical figures from the Second World War. After a few minutes, the computer returned a match that shook the historian to his core. The screen displayed the name Maria Volkova, a captain in Soviet military intelligence, who had supposedly died in March of 1943 during a partisan operation in occupied Belarus. Petrov immediately contacted his longtime colleague, Professor Dmitry Sokolov, from the Institute of Military History. Sokolov was a leading expert on Soviet intelligence operations during the Second World War and might be able to shed light on this extraordinary discovery. The two historians met that same evening in Petrov's office, where they carefully examined the photograph and Maria Volkova's file. According to official Soviet military archives, Maria Volkova was born in 1919 in Leningrad. She was recruited by Soviet military intelligence in 1940, thanks to her extraordinary linguistic talent. Volkova spoke fluent German, Polish, and French, making her an ideal agent for operations in occupied Europe. In 1942, she was dropped into occupied Poland to gather intelligence on Nazi troops and facilities. In March of 1943, her unit was ambushed during a raid on a Nazi ammunition depot, and according to reports, she died along with several other partisans. But if she died in March, how could she appear in a photograph taken in Ravensbrück in September of the same year? Something didn't add up. Petrov and Sokolov decided to delve deeper into the history of the Ravensbrück camp and the specific circumstances that might have led to Volkova's capture. Ravensbrück was a Nazi concentration camp located approximately 90 kilometers north of Berlin. It was founded in May of 1939 and served as the main women's concentration camp of the Third Reich. By 1943, it held around 42,000 women from different countries in Europe. The camp is infamous for the brutal medical experiments conducted on prisoners, especially on young Polish women, who were called rabbits. These experiments included deliberately infecting wounds with bacteria, transplanting bones and muscles, and forced sterilization. Further research in the archives revealed an interesting detail. In July of 1943, the Soviet High Command received alarming reports about medical experiments at Ravensbrück. The information was fragmented, but concerning enough for the command to decide to send an agent to confirm these reports and, if possible, document the atrocities. The agent's name wasn't mentioned in the available documents, but the timeline matched Volkova's appearance in the camp. But how could Volkova have infiltrated one of the most heavily guarded Nazi concentration camps? And what happened to her after the photograph was taken? Answers to these questions required a deeper investigation and the involvement of experts from various fields. Petrov and Sokolov decided to assemble an interdisciplinary team including specialists in digital forensics, military historians, and experts in body language. Their first step was to apply advanced digital enhancement technologies to the photograph to extract as much information as possible from every pixel. Dr. Elena Kuznetsova, a leading expert in digital forensics from Moscow State University, used specialized software to analyze the photograph. Under her guidance, various enhancement methods were performed, including noise reduction, contrast enhancement, and image stabilization. The results exceeded all expectations. The enhanced photograph not only confirmed the identity of Maria Volkova, but also revealed details that were invisible in the original image. The most significant discovery was the subtle hand gestures being made by two Nazi officers standing on either side of Volkova. These gestures weren't random hand positions, but looked intentional and structured. Dr. Mikhail Lebedev, a historian and expert in espionage tactics from the Second World War, was amazed when he saw the enhanced image. Lebedev explained that these gestures corresponded to a secret signaling system used by British intelligence and its allies during the war. The specific positions of fingers and hands could transmit short messages between agents without words. In the photograph, one officer standing to Volkova's left held his hand in such a way that his index and middle fingers were slightly separated, which meant attention or danger. Another officer standing to the right held his thumb inside a clenched fist, which meant friend or ally. This discovery had staggering implications. If Lebedev's interpretation was correct, it meant that at least two SS officers in the photograph were, in fact, Allied agents working under deep cover within the Nazi regime. It seemed almost unbelievable, but the history of the war is full of examples of deeply embedded spies and double agents. To move forward, the research team turned to British and American intelligence archives that had been declassified in recent years. A search of databases of Allied operations behind enemy lines revealed several interesting connections. Documents dating back to 1942 mentioned an operation codenamed Swan, which involved infiltrating agents into the highest echelons of the SS and other Nazi organizations. The agents' names were redacted, but the time frame and geographical indications matched the situation in Ravensbrück. One document particularly caught the researchers' attention. It was a partially redacted British intelligence report dated October 1943, mentioning the successful extraction of a critical source from Facility R, where R likely stood for Ravensbrück. The report also mentioned valuable information on medical procedures obtained through the operation and the loss of 2 long-term assets. This could indicate that Volkova had been successfully extracted from the camp, but 2 Allied agents were exposed and killed in the process. To confirm this theory, the research team proceeded to identify the Nazi officers in the photograph. This was a difficult task, as many SS records were destroyed at the end of the war, and many high-ranking officers changed their appearances and identities to avoid capture. However, using facial recognition software and surviving SS archives, the researchers were able to identify 6 of the 8 officers in the photograph. 2 of them particularly interested the research team. The first, Obersturmführer Werner Schmidt, was a security officer at Ravensbrück from 1941. According to official records, he died under mysterious circumstances in October 1943, just a few weeks after the photograph was taken. The second, Hauptsturmführer Karl Müller, was transferred from Ravensbrück in November 1943 and later died during an Allied bombing raid in 1945. Interestingly, it was these 2 officers who made the hand signals identified by Lebedev as Allied codes. But even more intriguing, an in-depth study of their biographies revealed several inconsistencies. Schmidt supposedly grew up in Hamburg, but records of his education there were missing. Müller claimed to have served in the German army in the First World War, but his age made this impossible. These discrepancies were typical signs of fabricated biographies, often used for deeply undercover agents. The research team became increasingly convinced that they had uncovered an incredible story of espionage and counterintelligence hidden in a simple photograph. But the main question remained unanswered. What happened to Maria Volkova after the photograph was taken? Was she executed, as one would expect for a captured spy in a Nazi concentration camp? Or did she manage to escape this fate with the help of Allied agents? The answer came from an unexpected source. While browsing recently declassified Soviet archives, the research team discovered a folder of documents relating to the post-war careers of Soviet intelligence officers. Among them was a file in the name of Maria Sokolova, a language instructor at a Moscow intelligence school from 1946 to 1962. The photograph in the file, although taken several years later, unmistakably showed the same woman as in the photograph from Ravensbrück. Maria Volkova had survived. Further research in the Soviet archives revealed a fascinating story of rescue and intelligence. According to declassified reports, Volkova was sent to Ravensbrück with a specific mission: to document the medical experiments being conducted on prisoners. She infiltrated the camp disguised as a new administrative employee, with forged documents provided by a local resistance network. For several weeks, she managed to gather information and even take hidden photographs of the laboratory and medical barracks. However, in September of 1943, her identity was revealed by one of the guards, who noticed that she had entered an area forbidden to administrative personnel. She was immediately arrested and interrogated. It was during this interrogation that the photograph was taken, documenting the moment before what was supposed to be her execution. But what happened next was the result of one of the most daring rescue operations of the Second World War. The 2 SS officers, who were actually deeply undercover Allied agents, organized a fake execution. Volkova was taken to the courtyard where her death by a bullet to the head was staged, using blanks and theatrical blood. Her body was placed in a body bag and sent to the crematorium. However, on the way to the crematorium, the van was stopped, supposedly for inspection, and Volkova was extracted and replaced with the body of a recently deceased prisoner of similar build. It was an incredibly risky operation that jeopardized the entire Allied spy network in the camp, but the stakes were unusually high. Volkova had collected irrefutable evidence of the cruel medical experiments being conducted on prisoners, including detailed records, names of doctors, and even samples used in the experiments. This information was too valuable to be lost. After her staged execution, Volkova was secretly transported through a series of safe houses organized by the European resistance until she reached Soviet lines in November of 1943. The information she gathered was immediately passed to the Allies, providing irrefutable evidence of war crimes being committed in the concentration camps. This evidence was later used in the Nuremberg trials, helping to secure the conviction of many Nazi war criminals. But what happened to the 2 SS officers who risked their lives to save Volkova? The research team found that their fates were as dramatic as the rescue operation itself. Werner Schmidt, whose true identity remains unknown, was exposed and executed just weeks after Volkova's rescue. His last message to the Allies, sent via a secret radio transmission, reported a mass movement of prisoners from eastern camps to the west in anticipation of the approaching Red Army. This information helped the Allies prepare for the humanitarian crisis that would follow the liberation. Karl Mahler, whose real name was Richard Bradford, was a British agent who successfully maintained his cover until January 1945, when he was transferred to Berlin. There, he continued to transmit valuable information to the Allies until his death during a bombing raid in March 1945. His contribution to the war effort was only recognized after the war, when he was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest British military decoration for bravery. But the story of Maria Volkova and the brave Allied agents who saved her didn't end with the end of the war. The information she gathered and the subsequent intelligence operations she conducted had a lasting impact on the post-war world. After returning to the Soviet Union, she continued to work in intelligence, specializing in training new agents in languages and infiltration techniques. She retired in 1962 and lived a quiet life in Moscow until her death in 1989. But her legacy lives on in the evidence she collected and the lives she helped save. The medical experiments in Ravensbrück would have continued for many more months if not for her courageous mission. Thanks to her actions and the help of secret Allied agents, countless lives were saved and the crimes of the Nazis were documented for history. The discovery of the Ravensbrück photograph and the subsequent investigation opened a window into one of the most astonishing stories of espionage and heroism of the Second World War. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, individual men and women are willing to risk everything for truth and justice. But what they discovered next changed everything. Further analysis of the photograph and accompanying documents revealed an even deeper layer of mystery. It turned out that the medical experiments in Ravensbrück were more complex and sinister than initially thought. They weren't limited to simply testing drugs or surgical procedures on prisoners. According to documents collected by Volkova, Nazi doctors were conducting experiments involving genetic modifications and experimental psychological techniques aimed at creating the ideal Aryan soldier. Professor Anna Kovalchuk, a geneticist from St. Petersburg State University, was invited to analyze the medical records collected by Volkova. Her findings were shocking. Nazi doctors were attempting to alter the genetic makeup of test subjects using primitive methods that foreshadowed modern genetic research by decades. Of course, their methods were brutal and unethical, and most victims died in agony or were left with severe deformities. But the most disturbing aspect of these experiments was their source of funding. According to documents found in the archives, some of these studies were financed not only by the Nazi regime, but also by secret funds coming from corporations and even individuals from Allied countries. This pointed to the existence of an international network interested in the results of these inhumane experiments, regardless of their ethical implications. Further investigation revealed the names of several prominent industrialists and scientists from the United States, Great Britain, and even the Soviet Union, who secretly supported these experiments through a complex network of shell companies and intermediaries. This information was so explosive that much of it remained classified until recently. One particular document found in the archives was particularly disturbing. It was a letter from an American industrialist, whose name was redacted, to the chief physician of Ravensbrück, expressing impatience in receiving the results of certain experiments and promising additional funding to expand the research. The letter was dated July 1943, at a time when the United States was in a state of total war with Nazi Germany. This finding had profound consequences. It indicated that some powerful figures in Allied countries were willing to collaborate with the Nazi regime for the sake of scientific data, regardless of the human suffering involved in obtaining it. It also explained why some of these experiments remained classified for so long after the war. The research team also discovered that medical data collected in Ravensbrück was partially transferred to the Allies after the war as part of Operation Paperclip, a program in which Nazi scientists were recruited by American and Soviet authorities to work in their respective countries. Some of these scientists continued their research, although with less brutal methods, contributing to post-war advances in medicine and genetics. The ethical dilemma of using data obtained in such terrible ways became a central topic of discussion in the medical community. Some argued that using this data perpetuated the suffering of the victims, while others believed that refusing to use information that could save lives would also be unethical. For Maria Volkova, this dilemma was very personal. According to her post-war memoirs, which were recently discovered in a private archive, she struggled with the question of whether she should have destroyed the data she collected, knowing its origin. Ultimately, she decided to pass the information on to the authorities, hoping that the suffering of the victims would not be in vain. But the most surprising discovery was yet to come. During the investigation, the research team discovered a connection between the experiments at Ravensbrück and a secret post-war program known as Project Horizon. This program, funded by a consortium of international corporations and government agencies, continued some of the research directions started in Ravensbrück, albeit with more ethical methods. Project Horizon was officially presented as a research initiative to study the human genome and the potential of genetic modifications to treat hereditary diseases. However, documents discovered by the research team indicated more ambitious goals, including creating humans with enhanced physical and cognitive abilities. This project operated under different names and in different countries from the late 1940s to the mid-1970s, when it was officially terminated due to ethical concerns and a changing political climate. However, some elements of the research continued in the private sector, and their influence is felt in contemporary debates about genetic enhancement and the ethics of genetic engineering. The research team also discovered that several prominent scientists and political figures who were involved in Project Horizon had direct links to Nazi experiments at Ravensbrück. Some of them were former Nazi scientists who escaped justice thanks to their valuable knowledge, while others were representatives of Allied countries who collaborated with Nazi scientists during the war. This network of influence and secrecy explains why many aspects of the Nazi medical experiments remained classified for so long. It also explains why some areas of modern genetic research face such strong ethical objections and public distrust. During the investigation, the research team also discovered that several descendants of victims of the experiments at Ravensbrück exhibited unusual genetic anomalies that could have resulted from manipulations performed on their ancestors. These anomalies included unusual immune responses, accelerated tissue regeneration, and increased resistance to certain diseases. Professor Kovalchuk suggested that the Nazi experiments might have caused epigenetic changes that were passed down to subsequent generations. Epigenetics, the study of changes in gene expression that do not involve alterations to the basic DNA sequence, was a little-known field during World War II. But the Nazi experiments may have inadvertently triggered effects that modern scientists are only now beginning to understand. This discovery had profound consequences for the descendants of the victims. Many of them already suffered from psychological trauma related to their ancestors' experiences, but now they faced the possibility that their own genetic structure had been altered without their consent. Some viewed these changes as a continuing legacy of Nazi barbarism, while others saw them as an opportunity for a better understanding of the human genome and potential therapeutic applications. The research team also investigated the fates of other Nazi officers depicted in the photograph. Aside from the 2 identified Allied agents, the remaining 6 were confirmed members of the SS with various roles in the camp administration. 3 of them were executed for war crimes after the Nuremberg trials. 1 committed suicide at the end of the war, and 2 escaped justice, fleeing to South America through the infamous Ratlands, a network of escape routes used by Nazis. One of these escaped officers, Obersturmbannführer Heinrich Wagner, particularly interested the researchers. After the war, he settled in Argentina under the name Ricardo Clemens and became a successful businessman specializing in the pharmaceutical industry. His company, Clemens Biotechnologies, became a major supplier of drugs and medical equipment throughout South America. After his death in 1982, the company was acquired by a large international pharmaceutical corporation. What troubled the researchers was that Clemens Biotechnologies' early products were strikingly similar to drugs being developed at Ravensbrück. This indicated that Wagner had not only escaped justice but had also continued to profit from the horrific experiments conducted during the war. Moreover, his connections to international pharmaceutical companies suggested that knowledge gained from these experiments continued to circulate in the medical community long after the war. Modern technology was crucial to this investigation. Without advanced digital image enhancement techniques, facial recognition software, and the ability to quickly search vast digital archives, the photograph from Ravensbrück might have remained just another historical artifact, its deeper secrets forever hidden. But technology also played a role in uncovering the consequences of the Nazi experiments for the descendants of the victims. Modern genetic testing methods allowed researchers to identify specific epigenetic markers that could have resulted from the experiments at Ravensbrück. These markers, while not necessarily harmful, represent a genetic imprint of trauma passed down through generations. Dr. Erik Linder, a geneticist from the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm who specializes in transgenerational epigenetics, was invited to analyze these markers. His findings were striking. The markers identified in the descendants of the Ravensbrück victims were not only unique to this group, but also showed signs of deliberate modification. In other words, they were not simply the result of trauma or stress, but rather of targeted genetic manipulation. Linder explained that these markers affected genes related to immune function, tissue repair, and cognitive processes. In some cases, these changes led to increased resistance to certain diseases, while in others, they were associated with an increased risk of autoimmune disorders and neurological conditions. The most disturbing aspect of these discoveries was that they suggested a level of genetic knowledge and technological capability that significantly predated the official history of genetics. Officially, the structure of DNA was not discovered until 1953, when James Watson and Francis Crick published their famous double helix model. But the experiments at Ravensbrück, conducted a decade before that, showed an understanding of genetic principles that should not have existed at the time. This contradiction led the research team to yet another shocking discovery. In the SS archives, they found references to a mysterious figure known only as Dr. Zara, a scientist who provided the theoretical framework for the experiments at Ravensbrück. The identity of this individual remained unknown, but his influence was evident in numerous documents and laboratory records. According to these records, Dr. Zara provided Nazi scientists with detailed instructions on how to manipulate what he called hereditary elements, a term strikingly similar to the modern understanding of genes. He also predicted the possibility of creating enhanced humans through targeted modifications of these elements, a concept that foreshadowed contemporary debates about genetic enhancement. The source of Dr. Zara's knowledge remained a mystery. Some documents hinted that he had access to ancient texts or forgotten knowledge, while others suggested that he was a self-taught genius who intuitively understood the principles of genetics. Regardless of the source, his influence on the Nazi medical experimentation program was profound and far-reaching. The research team also found evidence that after the war, several governments actively sought Dr. Zara and his research. Operation Paperclip, known for recruiting Nazi scientists for American and Soviet research programs, had a special unit dedicated to finding any documents or data related to this enigmatic figure. But the most astonishing discovery was related to Maria Volkova and her role in this story. According to recently declassified Soviet documents, Volkova's initial mission at Ravensbrück was not simply to document the medical experiments. She was specifically directed to seek information about Dr. Zara and his research. The Soviet High Command had somehow learned of his existence and recognized the potential value of his work for their own scientific programs. This explained why Volkova took such a risk, infiltrating one of the most heavily guarded Nazi facilities, and why the Allies were willing to jeopardize their spy network to ensure her escape. The information she gathered was not merely evidence of Nazi atrocities, but also a key to scientific knowledge that could provide a decisive advantage in the post-war world. After returning to the Soviet Union, Volkova did not simply become an instructor at an intelligence school. She was also involved in a secret scientific program codenamed Project Genome, the Soviet equivalent of Project Horizon. This program, operating under the cover of the Institute of Experimental Biology, aimed to unlock the secrets of human genetic modification using information gleaned from the Nazi experiments. Project Genome continued until the mid-1960s, when it was abruptly terminated after a series of failed experiments that led to the deaths of several participants. Officially, the project never existed, and all records of it were destroyed or deeply classified. Only with the recent declassification of Soviet archives has it become possible to confirm its existence and its connection to the Nazi experiments at Ravensbrück. This link between Nazi experiments and post-war scientific programs on both sides of the Cold War represents a disturbing reminder of how the pursuit of knowledge and power can overshadow ethical considerations. It also raises important questions about the origins of some modern medical and genetic advancements. As the investigation continued, the research team faced increasing resistance from various institutions and government agencies. Files that should have been accessible were suddenly classified as secret. Sources that had previously been cooperative now declined to comment. Even some members of the research team expressed concerns about continuing the investigation, citing potential risks to their careers and personal safety. This resistance only strengthened the resolve of the core group of researchers. They saw themselves not merely as historians documenting the past, but as defenders of the truth, seeking to shed light on a dark chapter of human history that continues to cast a shadow on the present. Dr. Petrov, who began this journey pondering a mysterious photograph from Ravensbrück, now stood at the center of an international investigation that spanned continents and decades. The simple historian became a voice for the victims who could not speak for themselves, and an exposer of secrets that powerful institutions sought to keep buried. In their final report, published in a prestigious historical journal, Petrov and his colleagues detailed their findings, including the links between Nazi experiments and post-war scientific programs, the roles of Maria Volkova and the secret Allied agents, and the ongoing impact of these events on modern medicine and genetics. The report caused an international sensation. Families of victims of Nazi experiments filed lawsuits against corporations and governments that allegedly profited from these experiments. Scientists re-examined the ethical frameworks of their research in light of the historical revelations. Politicians called for greater transparency and accountability in scientific research, especially those involving genetic modifications. But perhaps the most significant outcome of the investigation was a deeper understanding of the complexities of history and human nature. Maria Volkova, the courageous Soviet intelligence officer, became a symbol of resistance and bravery. The secret Allied agents working undercover in the SS served as a reminder that even in the darkest organizations, there can be individuals who risk everything for what is right. And the experiments themselves served as a grim reminder of how easily scientific curiosity can devolve into inhumane cruelty when it is divorced from ethical constraints. The photograph from Ravensbrück that began this journey is now displayed in the Holocaust Museum, accompanied by a detailed explanation of its significance and the stories of the people depicted in it. It serves as a silent witness to one of the darkest chapters of human history and the amazing story of courage and resistance that was almost lost to time. But the story did not end with the publication of the report and the exhibition of the photograph. In the course of the research, the team also discovered hints of the existence of other similar resistance networks operating in other Nazi camps and facilities. These networks, consisting of secret agents, Allied soldiers, sympathetic Germans, and prisoners, worked clandestinely to sabotage Nazi operations and save lives whenever possible. One such network, operating in Auschwitz, was responsible for smuggling key evidence about the scale of the Holocaust into the hands of the Allies, providing irrefutable proof of the Nazi genocide program that was subsequently used at the Nuremberg trials. Another network, operating in the Rocket Research Center at Peenemünde, provided valuable intelligence about the V-2 rocket program, which allowed the Allies to effectively bomb the facility and significantly slow its production. These stories of heroism and resistance, many of which had remained untold for decades, now began to come to light thanks to the beginning laid by the Ravensbrück photograph investigation. They offered a more nuanced understanding of the wartime, where the lines between friend and foe were not always clearly defined, and where individual acts of courage could have far-reaching consequences. For the descendants of victims of Nazi experiments, these discoveries brought mixed emotions. On one hand, they offered some sense of closure and justice, revealing the full truth about what had happened to their loved ones. On the other hand, they also raised disturbing questions about their own genetic inheritance and the potential implications for their health and the health of their children. In response to these concerns, a group of scientists, ethicists, and representatives from victims' families formed the Ravensbrück Genome Project, an initiative aimed at studying the long-term effects of Nazi genetic experiments and providing support and resources to descendants. The project offered genetic counseling, health monitoring, and access to specialized medical services for those who might carry epigenetic markers of the experiments. For the medical and scientific community, these discoveries presented a complex ethical dilemma. Many standard medical procedures and medicines used today were directly or indirectly linked to Nazi experiments. To abandon these procedures and medicines would mean potentially denying patients vital treatments. But to continue their use without acknowledging their origins would mean erasing the suffering of the victims whose bodies were used without their consent. In response to this dilemma, several medical associations and research institutions created memorialization and compensation programs aimed at recognizing the contribution of victims of Nazi experiments to modern medicine. These programs included the creation of scholarships for medical students from descendants of victims, the installation of memorials in medical schools and hospitals, and the funding of research projects in medical ethics. For the general public, the story of Maria Volkova, the secret agents, allies, and victims of Nazi experiments became a powerful reminder of the importance of vigilance against authoritarianism and the need for ethical frameworks in scientific research. It also served as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, individual acts of courage and resistance can have a lasting impact on the course of history. The photograph from Ravensbrück, once buried in forgotten archives, has now become an iconic image symbolizing both the horrors of the Nazi regime and the incredible courage of those who resisted it. Maria Volkova, the woman who risked everything to uncover the truth, and the secret agents who helped her escape, became heroes of a story that was almost lost to time. But perhaps the most important legacy of this story is a reminder that the truth has the ability to come to light, no matter how deeply it is buried. For 80 years, the photograph remained hidden, its secrets locked in the shadows of the past. But thanks to the persistence of historians, the power of modern technology, and the strength of the human quest for truth, these secrets were finally revealed, shedding light on one of the most amazing stories of World War II. So, the story of Maria Volkova and the photograph from Ravensbrück continues to inspire and enlighten, reminding us of the courage of those who resisted tyranny and the importance of preserving history for future generations. It also serves as a grim warning about the dangers of unchecked power in science without ethical constraints, lessons that remain as relevant today as they were 80 years ago, when a Nazi photographer took a seemingly ordinary snapshot that ultimately revealed an extraordinary story of courage, betrayal, and the indomitable human spirit.